Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. On today's episode of Homestead Coffee Talk, we are discussing some of the top headlines that have been in the news recently and why they might be affecting you in more ways than you actually realize. Grab your coffee, tea, water, whatever you are drinking today, and maybe even pull up a project or two, and we are going to multitask while we are having a chat about some of these current topics. As you can see, I am out here in the orchard, and this is a project that I have definitely procrastinated on. I should have had it done long ago, and I really wanted to have it done yesterday because today was super warm and nice, and lo and behold, here we are. It's still not finished, and well, we're just gonna try and go after it. So a little trick that you might already know, but one that my dad taught me, is that if you take an eyeglass cleaner and you empty the bottle, then you can use that spray bottle for rubbing alcohol, which you're going to want to spray on your pruners in between trees. That way, if for some reason you have some type of disease on one tree, you're not spreading it throughout your whole orchard onto every single tree. So you can also buy just the spray bottle plain on Amazon, or you could probably find it at any store. And it's kind of a handy way to keep your rubbing alcohol. Some of the things in the news, boy oh boy, when it comes to agricultural news, there is no shortage of different things that are happening these days. I mean, there's a lot. And sometimes I feel like when I read the news, I think, well, that doesn't really affect me, or I'm not really thinking about the big picture and how that might affect me and how I might want to make some changes or take some steps in order to set myself up for a more positive result, if that makes sense. One of the things that I've been reading about recently, it actually came out on the news today, is in Iowa, they're saying that 1 in 8 laying hens, so we're talking about chickens now, 1 in 8 laying hens has come down with the avian flu, and as a result, that is really impacting egg production from Iowa. And when we look at stories like that, and you take it kind of at face value, it's like, all right, well, that's in Iowa, and I don't live in Iowa, so that doesn't really affect me. But that's not true. We have seen many stories coming out recently of avian flu being found, I want to say Nebraska, quite a few states. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but in quite a few states back in more the Midwest, kind of heading toward the east, we've been seeing instances or occurrences of avian flu showing up. And while I don't live in those states, there are a few things that I know for sure. Number one, whatever egg production is impacted is going to impact egg availability at the store. First of all, it's going to impact the price potentially of products that contain eggs that I might be purchasing. And from a local homesteader perspective, it also might impact your current chicken flock. So if you already have chickens on the homestead, you really want to consider whether or not you're bringing new chicks into the flock, because anytime you introduce new animals into an existing herd or an existing flock, you run the risk of bringing in disease as well. Sometimes you make a cut and you're like, what was that about? It's really going the wrong way. So you run the risk of bringing in disease, bringing in just some unwanted variables. And so with that in mind, I would really think carefully about who you allow to come and visit your homestead and whether or not you're bringing new animals onto the property. If you already have an established flock, you might want to consider hatching some of your own eggs or hatching some of your own chicks, or you might want to consider not doing anything at all if you don't have, maybe you don't have a rooster so you can't hatch your own. You might want to consider not even bringing in new chickens this year, or any kind of birds or fowl. And you might also want to consider limiting the visits of people who have those types of animals on their homestead. And I know that this particular disease can be spread by wild birds as well, and you don't really have much control over that. I notice I've been trying to read up on some of the mitigation things that you can do, and if you have free range chickens, there's just not a lot that you are really going to be able to do to prevent things. A lot of the mitigation methods that were promoted and discussed had to do with limiting traffic, keeping the animals in the barns or the shed locations that you have for them. And so, you know, if you have free range, that's not really going to do the trick for you. So, you know, some of those things might not apply, but some things that you can do is not bring in new birds, and you can limit who's coming to the property that might already have a flock, and just maintaining overall cleanliness and just general practices that are going to be healthy and will help in that way. And of course, not everyone has chickens, so if you don't have chickens, how does it affect you? And like I already said, a lot of products that we buy have some type of egg product in them. So if you have something that you buy that is shelf stable, that contains eggs or something, you might want to look at going ahead and purchasing some of that, keeping it on hand. And that might be a way that you can address that. And if you don't have shelf stable items that you need to go ahead and pick up, you also might just want to consider setting aside a little extra money, because if that many layer hens are being affected, that means that the price of eggs is going to be affected. And so then maybe it's a matter of trying to decide, if you use enough eggs, that it would be cost effective for you to go ahead and start raising your own flock. And at that point, you could bring in fresh birds, I think, because you're not going to be exposing a pre-existing flock to any of those potential diseases. So those are just a few ways that that particular situation could affect you, and those are just a few mitigation things that might be of benefit. one of the challenges of moving to a new homestead is that if you already have an orchard that was kind of established when you got there, the previous owner may have had some type of vision or a way that they were pruning the trees. And so when you move on to that property and you are trying to look at how that's going to impact you, or maybe the way that you want the trees to be pruned and how you want to see them grow, it might not match up with the previous vision. And that's kind of where I'm at with this particular orchard. I think one of the reasons why it took me so long to even get out here and really get working on this project is because I was accustomed to pruning my trees in the espalier style. So at my urban homestead, everything was running along a flat plane, and so it was easy to contain everything to the wire that I had. And so it was very nice and tight and compact, and it was easy to see where everything needed to be pruned. And so working with the trees in more of a three-dimensional style is just a little bit different for me. And I think I had quite a bit of hesitation about even getting out here and getting started with it. And this really applies to anything that you're trying to do on the homestead. I could continue to hesitate and not get it done, which is kind of the direction that I was heading, or you just dive in and do the best that you can and figure if you make some mistakes, which I know that I will, everything is fixable in some manner or another. At least that's what I'm going to tell myself. So if I prune it incorrectly this year, that doesn't mean that everything is over. It just means that next year I'll have to make some adjustments and it'll be fine. And we'll just kind of go from there and see what we can do. So that's one of the reasons why I really neglected getting out here and pruning these trees earlier. And next up on the list is fertilizer shortages. Now, I had read yesterday about the Canadian rail workers who were on strike, which was greatly impacting the availability of fertilizer. We already know that there has been a shortage of fertilizer, and because of that, things were already not looking great. And so with a strike, it was going to impact, I think I read 75, well, it was going to impact a lot. 75% of the potash that we use is transported through Canadian railway, or that Canada uses, I guess. And so with farmers getting ready to plant up there in the next 4 to 6 weeks, if they didn't come to some sort of resolution, this was really going to place an even stronger burden on planting and food production. And then in addition to the farmers that it impacted in Canada, it also was going to impact farmers in the United States, because some of that potash gets sent down here as well to be put into those nitrogen types of fertilizer. And we already have a shortage going on, plus the situation in Russia where a lot of our fertilizer comes from. And so just all of these things really compound and pile on, which makes it hard to have the fertilizer necessary to grow the items. So big deal, you say, right? So let's talk about how that might impact you. So I used to have this mistaken idea that fertilizer shortages didn't really impact me. I tried to organically garden, and so, you know, we might use different mixes. I might use a variety of organic materials, but I'm not using commercial fertilizers or the chemical types of fertilizers. And so I thought, well, you know, fertilizer shortage, yeah, that's a big deal. However, that doesn't necessarily impact me. And that's really not true, because even though I personally might not be using that type of fertilizer, it is still the type of fertilizer that is going to be used in most commercial farming. And even if I'm trying to be as self-sufficient as possible and I'm trying to just grow as much as I can here, it's naive of me to think that I'm going to be able to grow absolutely everything that I'm going to need as far as food goes or things like that. So keeping that in mind, how does this affect me? And it really does affect the overall amount of food that's able to be grown. We've previously talked about wheat and corn shortages, and a fertilizer shortage continues to add to that negative impact that is already there. Corn is a very heavy feeder. It requires a lot of fertilization in order to adequately grow. And so I don't necessarily just buy corn at the store, although I have added a little bit of corn, as I've shown you in some of our pantry challenge videos. But just so many other products contain corn or corn oils, corn syrup. Whether or not you're using it in your own items and your own products, and whether or not you approve of the use of it, the bottom line is you're going to find that in the majority of foods that are on the market. And so anytime you have a corn shortage or a wheat shortage, it's going to impact the price of items and the availability of items. And, you know, that affects me. So what can I do about that? Well, one of the things that I can do is continue to grow as much as I can here on the homestead. That's something that you're never going to go wrong with. And along with that, continuing to really focus on improving the soil and just trying to boost the soil health is going to mean that the plants are going to be healthier, more productive. They will require less fertilizer to grow. And so just really trying to focus on overall soil health is going to be a huge benefit here on the homestead. And then kind of additionally with that is thinking about how you can maybe add some of those items to your pantry that you frequently use, that you know contain wheat or corn, some of these items that are just frequently coming up in your meals, and try to set a little bit of that aside so that you have what you need later on down the road. Kind of along that same line, if you know, we know fertilizer has a shortage and we know it's not going to be as readily available, but we also know that there are wheat and corn shortages happening all over the place. And we've talked about the shortages here, and we talked about making some provisions and trying to, again, add some of those items to your pantry so that you have them on hand, as far as flour, wheat berries, things like that. And I would encourage you to continue doing that. We really haven't even come close to seeing the total impact of what's been going on. One of the news articles that I read said that I want to say 60% of the fields in Ukraine, where a lot of wheat comes from, is not going to get planted this year because of the fact that it's either occupied by other forces, or they just don't have the materials and the things that they need in order to get those fields planted. And it's easy to sit back and say, well, that's over there, that doesn't affect me here in the United States. But again, if we think about long-term and the overall global nature of our economies and how everything is so tied together, even if we're not importing grain or corn from Ukraine, it's still that much food that's not going out into the overall population and into the overall food supply. And so it's going to affect everyone in one way or another, whether that is reduced availability or increased prices, because there has to be reduced availability in certain locations in order to push that out to other areas that don't have it. So, you know, again, what are we going to do about that? And the simplest answer to that is I don't have control over the price of things. I don't have control over where the food goes, but I do have control over what I'm trying to do here on the homestead. So what that might mean for you is, like I said earlier, maybe you're looking at frequently used items that you need to set aside in the pantry so that you have what you need later on. And maybe you also need to look at other options and other things that you can grow in your garden that could supplement that loss, if that makes sense. So whatever that means to you, whether that means you have the space and the capacity to take on growing corn or wheat, or whether that means you have some type of alternative method that you're using and that works well for you. Whatever that means for you, just being aware of it is going to help you to be more proactive in mitigating that loss or that absence from the food supply chain. So there's a lot going on in the world today, and most of it we don't have control over. And I'm not saying that you need to spend a lot of time dwelling on the negative news. However, I do think it's healthy to at least be aware of some of the challenges that are going on out there and use that knowledge and that information to kind of spur you on and motivate you to really hone your craft at home and really focus in on things. For instance, this project, I have been procrastinating and I didn't really want to do it, but knowing where we are at as far as food supply chain and how things are looking, it really is motivating to me to say, boy, I didn't get it done when I should have, but I'm gonna go ahead and try to do the best I can to finish up as I can. So I hope this was helpful to you today. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I can't wait to see you back here next time. Bye everyone.